What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 278. My name is Marshall. I am one of your Limited Resources. Joining me on the line. Now, Luis, I need to know, it's Clone Legion or Conifer Strider? Which one are you on right now?
I'm on the side of the Clone Legion. I think that the Legion is strong and the Legion will prevail.
But, using the logic that you're using to pick Clone Legion, I think Conifer Strider is better because it beat you.
Marshall is, of course, referring to the Dragons of Tarkir streamer draft where I did pick Clone Legion despite my protestations that I would draft seriously, and then I drafted Clone Legion. I cast Clone Legion round 1, and it never resolved because my opponent scooped. Kind of poor form there, but what can you do?
That was crappy because you were about to go off. By the way, it's Luis Scott-Vargas.
It is.
That was your intro.
Yeah, it was a good intro. It was very smooth.
Super solid.
But I did lose to Conifer Strider in round 3.
It's Conifer. Come on, man. If you were from the Pacific Northwest, you would know this. I will accept Clonifer Strider if you want to try to mix the two, but otherwise you have to say Conifer.
Conifer. Okay.
All right. So we've got a whole lot of stuff to cover on the show this week. A lot of fun stuff, too. We've been doing the set reviews the last 2 weeks, and Luis and I both enjoy doing them in the sense that, there's a sense of accomplishment when you're done, but they're a ton of work. And these are a lot more fun, these episodes, where we get to do more crack-a-packs and get caught up on a bunch of stuff that's been kind of hanging around for a while. Before we get into all that, though, I want to mention our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. Fantastic place to not only buy Magic card sealed product and or singles, but also to check out all the great free content they have on there. If you want to get better at Magic, which I know that's what you're here to do, you can do it by reading the articles and watching some of the best players in the world play Magic. And I guarantee just through osmosis, just watching that stuff, you'll pick it up. Now, if you want to take it to the next level, you're going to have to play against players of that caliber. And that's a little more difficult. But, considering the fact that you can come home from work and, grab some dinner and throw on a draft or a standard video or read a couple of articles and actually tangibly get better, I think that's a fantastic value and a great reason to visit channelfireball.com. Also, grandprixvegas.com, another site that you should visit. Things are moving along pretty briskly with that, Luis.
They are, and we actually just put the side event schedule live, and it might seem crazy to be talking about that a month and a half before the event, but we expect the side events to sell out. We expect a lot of the really appealing ones, which there are many, to actually sell out. I mean, you get to play with Modern Masters too, Modern Masters 2015. This is a big deal. You get to play with the cards, you get to win the cards, you get to do all sorts of, pretty high value side events, and besides, of course, the main event. So if you want to check out grandprixvegas.com, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and if you remember, anytime these Modern Masters style sets come out, they're a limited print run. They don't say how many they print, but we do know that they don't just keep printing it endlessly. So you got to kind of get your hands on it while you can. And, a big GP like GP Vegas is a great place to do that. The lot of product is going to be open over the course of a 4-day event officially. It's going to be, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right?
Yeah, I have not booked my travel yet, but I assume I'm getting there on Thursday now. I mean, there's just too much. Like last Grand Prix Vegas, I got there on Friday and regretted not getting there earlier.
I was actually, I was talking with Ben Stark today, and I was asking him when he was going to get in there, and we both couldn't wait. We're rooming up together for a couple of weeks out there for poker stuff and GP, and there's another tournament too, and we're getting in on Tuesday, or maybe I can't remember what day, but we're going early. I don't want to miss anything. And plus, of course, I'm going to be working for the greater part of the weekend. Anyway, make sure you check that out. If you're planning on attending, grandprixvegas.com, get signed up for those side events and of course the main event as well. Besides that, Channel Fireball is returning to Europe to run another GP. After Liverpool, it's Copenhagen, and you can pre-register now for that at gpcopenhagen.com. Also, if you want to support Limited Resources more directly, you can do so via the Patreon. We've got a couple of cool things coming up for that after the Pro Tour that I'll be talking about on the show. And you can check that out over at patreon.com/limited resources, or you can just find the link in the show notes or on lrcast.com. Okay. Crack a pack. Ooh, it's been a little while, Luis. We haven't done one, and we finally get to do a Dragons of Tarkir crack a pack. So let's see if we can't open you up a Clone Legion here so that I can make you ignore it. I will note in my never-ending rampage against Clone Legion, you cited it out quite a bit. Correctly.
All right, I'm gonna give you two pieces of information.
Okay.
One is every time I cast Clone Legion, I won the game.
Yeah, that is true. I saw that.
And two, a deck featuring Clone Legion made it to the finals of the draft and only had to get Mana Screwed to lose. So if you take a look at the results that I achieved, I think it's pretty clear that Clone Legion is awesome.
Oh God. Why did I have you come on the show? I'm like just deeply filled with regret. All right. First card is Resupply. That's the 6 mana, 5 and a white instant. You gain 6 life, you draw a card.
Sphinx's Revelation.
Spinning your wheels a little bit. Yeah, that one I haven't seen played yet, and I don't really expect it to see much play.
I think the card's slightly better than that. I'm not saying the card's good or you should take it early. You're not going to take it in any pack you open it in. But if you're playing a very controlling deck, say with Clone Legion as a finisher, or I mean, and because this isn't a joke, let me change that to some other good 6 or 7 cost card as a finisher and just a controlling deck in general. Resupply is not the worst card to cast. It does take you out of burn range. I'm not really like standing behind the card, but I'm just saying it's not strictly unplayable.
Okay, one of the cards that you did play, and I've actually had a little experience with as well so far, is Contradict. And my experience with Contradict has actually been pretty good. I think I moved it up a little bit from where I had it, though still recognizing that like that card. Remember, by the way, Contradict is the 3 blue counter spell, and you draw a card. But I'm not bumping it up like a full notch or anything like that. But I have found that at least in the early stages, now I'm only a couple of drafts and a few sealeds into the format, I have been able to find board states where even if I can get things stable enough so that Contradict does things. And, one of the stipulations that we had in the set review was, well, if the megamorphs are the type of thing where it feels enough like cons, where you're passing the turn a lot with a ton of mana open, threatening to flip up a morph, then Contradict would go up. And I think that's borne itself out so far. I think that it's definitely the case that, there's times when I'm passing with my mana up for Contradict, but I have other options to do with it. And I think that does bump it up a little.
It does. And I think that there's also enough incentives to draft a slightly more controlling deck than there have been in other formats, that even though Contradict is not a card you could put into any limited format and have be good, it's been decent for me. Again, I'm not ready to say, yeah, you should take this third pick and you should always play it, because that's just not true. But yeah, having 1 or 2, maybe even 2 of these in a slightly slower deck doesn't seem awful to me.
No, I like 1. I like 1 being the stopping point for most of them. Next one is Hand of Silumgar. That's 1 and a black for a 2/1 with Death Touch. He's also a warrior, Luis, and this guy's been fine. Yeah,
it's I think a little better than Typhoid Rats. Paying an extra mana to get +1/+0 is generally not a good deal. In fact, no. I know when you're trying to design cards and you want a way to weaken a card is to battle growth it, is to add a mana and +1/+1. Because that generally makes a card worse especially for constructed. But in this case, doubling the power means that your opponent can no longer just take the damage when you attack. And that's one of the reasons that Typhoid Rats is weak, is that when you're on the aggressive, then the Typhoid Rats just doesn't do anything. It just only does 1 a turn. Hand does 2 a turn. You don't have that many 2-drops anyway, so it's not that big of a mana savings to play it on turn 1 instead of turn 2. Overall, it's just a fine card.
Yeah, I found it very solid too. Primarily defensively against, I've played 2 times now. I've played against red-green decks, and I found anything with Death Touch really good against that. Hardened Berserker is next. That's the 3/2 for 2 and a red, and whenever it attacks, your next spell costs 1 less. One thing that I found that was kind of interesting about this creature is, it's whatever your next spell is. And I think my brain immediately went to, I can like attack with this and then play, my 6-drop a turn early, right? And I'm going to develop my board. But another thing it does, which is kind of cool, is like the combat trick that you want to play to get this thing through a block, or maybe even a removal spell to get a blocker out of the way that you wouldn't have normally been able to cast that turn. Also, that could just be your next spell too. And, I found, that actually comes up more than I thought it would, just from having watched the card get played a few times already, especially because there do seem to be quite a few combat tricks running around in the format.
Yeah, I like Hardened Berserker. I think it's a pretty reasonable card. Just to include any like kind of mid-rangey red deck, you don't have to be aggressive for it to be good. I do think it's slightly less good than, say, Hand of Silumgar, so I would not anticipate taking it out of this pack.
Yeah. Also, I have noticed that the 3 power really does help with Formidable nicely. Sure. That comes up a little bit too. Sidisi's Faithful is next. That's the blue 0/4 with Exploit. If you exploit, you can return a creature to its owner's hand. I've been playing these, but I've actually found that these are what's getting exploited a lot more often than I'm actually exploiting with it. I have, and it's been good. I found it totally serviceable to bounce, something that I felt needed to be bounced for time purposes. But there's a decent amount of the time that this is me playing it as just a 1-drop that can hold off something for a while, and then later on it gets gobbled up by a Vulturous Aven or something like that.
I'm not a huge fan of this card. Just in general, like its power level is not high enough for me to really want to include it. But when you have a deck with multiple Vulturous Avens, sometimes you just want a cheap creature, and this can do something. Sometimes when you're, especially in a deck with Vulturous Avens, sometimes you have 6 or 7 cards in your hand on like turn 5, and you want to just play 2 spells in the same turn. Bouncing their 4-drop and playing a 4-drop is not a bad sequence of events. If you have excess cards, this does turn cards into tempo, which generally not a good plan in limited, except sometimes it is. And this adds both an exploit creature and a decent effect. So I don't think it's bad. Yeah,
I think it's just okay, though, and I'm certainly not picking it very highly. It is a relatively low impact card, sadly. 2 and a green, Einok Artillerist is 2 and a green for the 4/1, and it's got reach as long as it's got a counter on it, a +1/+1 counter on it, rather. I haven't played with or against this guy yet.
I played against it. It's about what it appears, which is a 3-mana 4/1. It's a Gorswine.
Okay.
The extra ability, of course, is better than not having it, but you're not really looking to add a +1/+1 counter on it so you can trade for a flyer. So
this is like a formidable enabler for you then? Or, I mean, it just trades with everything, right?
It's a formidable enabler. It's good with Temur Battle Rage. It's a card that you would want if you're, interested in attacking and have ways to get it through. And it's also a card that can just trade for almost anything on defense if you really need a 3-drop blocker. So
yeah.
Whatever you think about Gorswine, I imagine you'll think basically the same thing about this, with the caveat that green is actually a little less likely to want it than red. So it's even slightly worse than Gorswine, despite being a strictly better card in terms of what it actually
does. That is funny, isn't it? Yeah. The one other thing that to remember is that since it does only have 1 toughness, any bolster can go on it. And, so you can get that reach thing going on pretty easily. It's just, I just don't know if it's that great as a 5/2 with reach. Dragon's Eye Sentry is next. That's white for a 1/3 defender first strike. I boarded it in once. It was fine. But not a high impact card.
This is basically just a strictly sideboard card. If you have 3 Vulturous Avens, maybe you need to play this just to have a fodder. But in general, this is just a sideboard card.
Right. Next is Guardian Shieldbearer. That is the 2/1 for 1 and a green with Megamorph. And you can Megamorph it for 3 and a green. And, when it's turn face up, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. Of course, it gets its own counter for Megamorph as well. A little instant speed trick. You do need to put it somewhere else. If this is your only creature, you're not going to get that extra ability. This card seems like fine. I expect that these will make the cut most of the time in decks. It has a nice little curve of, you can Megamorph it on 3 and then, or like you can play it face down on 3 and then Megamorph it on 4 and maybe get some tempo going. But, this is a kind of like the Artillerist. It's a card that like I expect to see often, but is never really, I don't think it's like exciting or whatever.
No, it's a card you'll almost always play because it's just a fine Megamorph, but it's not a ton more than that. And sometimes you'll get a little value out of it. Sometimes you can 2-4 your opponent off of it.
Yeah, there you go. This one's pretty decent. In fact, Randy tried to get you with this one in the draft that you just did. Sarkhan's Rage. This is the 4 and a red instant, and it does 5 damage to a creature or player. But if you don't have any dragons, it does 2 to you as well. This card is just very strong, right? I mean, like being able to dome your opponent for 5 can be a big deal. It also just kills most threats.
I like Sarkhan's Rage. It's a good finisher and a good removal spell. It's kind of hard to pass up on something that does both those things reasonably well. I'm not going to say incredibly well because paying 5 to kill a creature is not an insane deal. It's just fine. And it does 2 to you. So sometimes you will draw the game with this. I want to see that. And it's going to happen.
Yeah, that'll happen for sure. In fact, I made a block one in one of the drafts that I did. And the only reason that didn't happen was because I blocked. It was a chump block. Vial of Dragonfire is next. So 2 colorless artifact, and then you can pay 2 colorless, tap it and sack it to have it do 2 damage to a creature.
I think it costs 4 and you pay 2 and tap and sack it to draw 4 cards. Or at least that's what I speculated in my set review when the Renowned Weaponsmith was revealed before.
So you were a little sad when this one actually got revealed?
No, I was not surprised.
Yeah, no. What do you think about it though? Like this is one of those, we've seen colorless direct damage spells come out over the last few sets. Goblin Boom Keg, I think, was one. There's a couple of others like that, and none of them really see play. Is Vial different?
It is different. It's very playable. It costs 4 mana to deal 2, which is not a great deal, but you get to just pop it out there on turn 2 when you don't have anything else to do, and it gives removal to decks that may not have targeted removal in this sense. So,
yeah, I think the way we like to describe that is it's on the installment plan, right? It looks like, oh, you got to pay 4 mana to do 2 damage, not a great deal. And while that's technically true, it's so much different when you have to pay 2 and then 2. Like you said, you can play it on turn 2. You can play a 3-drop on turn 5 and then play Vial. And you can just find a slot in your curve to get it down, and then you can just leave it there and use it when you need to use it. It really does make it more flexible, but ultimately it is clunky, right? I mean, it's also on board. So, there's going to be times where that gets awkward too, where your opponent will be able to leave up a trick or something to play around it and really kind of put you in a bad spot. I don't really see this one being a high pick at any point, but
it's not a high pick.
Yeah.
You'll play it, I think, a little bit more often than not, which is, certainly not a outstanding card, but
not a glowing recommendation.
No,
yeah.
No.
What probably goes in the decks that really look at their removal suite or whatever and just say, God, I need something to be able to get rid of a cheap creature at some point. It's that goblin, the one that was going ham. It's Butcher's Glee. He's going crazy.
Yeah, Butcher's Glee is awesome.
This card's
like Butcher's
sweet.
Glee.
Yeah.
It's a +3/+0 lifelink and regenerator creature for 2 and a black at instant speed. So this is a 3 mana combat trick that's going to trade for a creature most of the time, which is, not super impressive on the face of things, but you gain 5 to 6 life, maybe more. And sometimes you're just going to throw this out on your 5/4 when your opponent doesn't block it. They take 8, you gain 8, and it's really hard to race.
Yeah, totally. I think Butcher's Glee has overperformed so far. Again, in our new world of worse removal, Butcher's Glee is the kind of card that does good. And even though we got some actually decent removal in this set, it's still not like how it was. And I feel pretty confident running Butcher's Glee. And then the fact that it regenerates it, man, just being able to you play some big dragon. If you get to untap after that and you have Butcher's Glee, now it's just this defensive spell that just sits there until they go to try to kill your guy, and then you can Butcher's Glee to save it. I think that card's really good. I'm glad it costs 3 though. If it costs more, it would be really crappy, and if it costs less, it would be really annoying. All right, uncommons. Silumgar's Scorn. That's the blue counter spell. If you have a dragon either in your hand or on the battlefield, and if you don't, well, it counters a spell, but only if its controller doesn't pay a colorless mana.
This is more of a constructed card than a limited one.
Is that right?
I think this card is perfectly good and constructed.
I do too.
You can build a deck that has dragons in it, and when you draw it early, you don't even need one. In limited, people tap, there are off curve more often. Also, you just don't have dragons. I mean, the set's called Dragons of Tarkir, but you're not going to have, on average, more than one dragon, if even that. I think on average, the deck will have less than one dragon.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I generally am not going to be playing this card. I'm certainly not picking it early.
I saw 2 of these resolved in the draft that we did, and it was in the same game.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, and he had a dragon out too, so it was just counter that. Okay, fine, and then you can't have another one. Play a spell, counter that. It was oh man, Silumgar Scorn theme deck. Explosive Vegetation is next. That's 3 and a green sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basics and put them on the battlefield tapped. We don't know yet, right? This is one of those cards that's who knows?
Kind of. It's not, it is who knows in that we don't know how good it is, but it's not who knows in that this is just not going to be an early pick or a highly drafted card.
Fair.
It's going to be a playable card in some archetypes, but it's not something that you really need to go nuts about.
Self-Inflicted Wound. That's the sideboard card for black. It's 1 and a black sorcery. Target opponent sacrifices a green or white creature. If that player does, he or she loses 2 life. So, again, not a card that we'd consider first picking out of the pack. Now, that brings us to our rare. And before I read it, because it is our pick, I think.
Spoilers.
Where are we at here?
I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, I know. You don't get to know what it is. I want to know what you would take before it is.
Part of why I believe in your assessment that we're taking the rare is that we haven't even come close to a card I would want to
pick. This pack is awful, right?
Like right now, I think I'm on first picking Butcher's Glee, and I'm like very unhappy about it.
Yeah, I have a Butcher's Glee, Hand of Silumgar, and Sarkhan's Rage are my list.
Those are certainly the top three. I don't know. I guess I could see taking Hand of Silumgar. I don't know if I would first pick Sarkhan's Rage here.
God,
but either way, I'm not happy. Whoever's getting this pack second pick is going to be pretty disappointed.
They're going to be bummed, but we're pretty happy. Our rare is Deathbringer Regent. That's 5 black for a 5/6 flying dragon, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand and there are 5 or more other creatures on the battlefield, destroy all the other creatures. Yep, I'm in. Now, it's a 7 mana spell, and we have seen formats that are fast enough to really punish you for playing 7 mana, or in your case, 9 mana spells. But so far from what I've seen, this isn't one of those formats, and you can get away with casting a 7 drop. Maybe not, it still carries that tax with it of really needing to be a super late game spell. But this thing is nice. I had this in my draft. I actually had it passed to me in the second pack, and I was in black, and man, it was very good. The time, so I resolved it, and, I thought about trying to set up a turn where I could get my opponent, and I'm just playing it. Like, 5/6 flying is so hard to deal with for, basically any deck, and it didn't kill anything when it entered the battlefield, but it did kill my opponent 2 turns later, so can't really argue with that.
Yeah, if this isn't killing things, it's probably stabilizing the board by itself, and if it's killing things, it's clearly an excellent card, unless you for some reason put it onto a board where it kills all your creatures and your opponent doesn't have anything.
Yeah, it was funny though. Like, so the board was my opponent had 2 creatures that were decent, and I had 2 creatures that were, I thought, a little better, but not vastly outclassed, like 1 combat trick or removal spell away from my opponent having a better board state. And looking at it, I thought, well, maybe I pass a turn here. I didn't have anything else to do. And my opponent plays a spell, or a creature, excuse me. And then I get to Deathbringer Regent, but then I do lose my 2 creatures, and then they lose theirs. Then if they untap and do have a way to kill Deathbringer Regent, I've kind of blown out my own board. It does put you, like, look, if they've got 4 creatures and you have 1 creature, sure, go for it, because you're getting way ahead. But in this case, it was like, basically even, like 2 of my decent creatures for 2 of my opponent's decent creatures, and then maybe 1 random creature that they had drawn, which could be really good or could not. That would swing the scales one way or the other. But I decided it was just safer to just play it as a 5/6, and that way, if they did have a way to deal with it, I would still have a board state that I could work with.
Yeah, I think that it's a card that you can play in a couple different ways. But the thing is, you have all these paths, and all those paths lead into pretty good places.
Yeah, I guess that's what I found too. All right, you ready for another one?
Oh yeah, let's just crack another pack.
I get to be the one to smell them, not you. Oh yeah, that's good. All right, are you ready?
The problem is, if I was close enough to smell the pack, I'd be close enough to spell, well...
My cage.
Yeah.
Oh God, by the way, time out. Just take a 20 here. So in the draft, well, first I ended up with 3 Marsh Hulks in the first draft, which just made me cringe, because every time I flipped it up, they're like, what is it? Is it Marsh Hulk? I'm like, yes, it was my only, face down creatures. So I was catching a lot of crap for that. Thanks to you. And then though, in the next draft, I wasn't in black, and one of the people in the draft had a couple of them and kept saying it. And from across the room, it sounds like my name. I'm just like,
wait, is the joke that
yes,
Marshall
I know. I get
okay.
the joke, but I'm saying, if you just say like, oh, I flip up a Marshall, I'm like, what? Like, I honestly full on said what twice, like just thinking that they were trying to get my attention, and they just looked over at me. I'm like, oh my God. It's just like,
well, that's why when this started, I knew that there's no way you could stop it. It's just too good. Like, it's too perfect. Ugh. Like, I've made things that are a bit of a stretch, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. This was not a stretch.
Yeah.
This was just, open and shut. Like, the verdict is in, guilty, scheduled for immediate execution.
All right. So this, this next card, is advice that I would like to take right now. It's called Center Soul. Feel like I need to center myself. It's 1 and a white for an instant. And target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, and it's got rebound. whatever, right? Like this card just isn't exciting. It's fine. I saw it resolved a couple of times. It blanked a removal spell, but I could also see just not playing these. I could see these easily being in the 23rd, 24th, 25th card, bracket.
Definitely. And it's the kind of card that the decks that want it, will be happy taking it at 5th or 6th, but most decks won't want it, and those decks will then get it later. Speaking
of decks or cards that most decks won't want, I've got Carsey Sadist here. That's the 1 and a black 1/3 with exploit, and when it exploits a creature the opponent loses 2 and you gain 2, it just drains them for 2. It's a pretty minimal effect. This is also falls in that category that I said earlier about Sidisi's Faithful, where I played a couple of these, not with the intention of exploiting, but just with the intention of sort of holding off any early assault, and then bye-bye. They get eaten up by the Avens and the Drowners and such.
Yeah, it's funny that cards that are like these cheap vanilla-ish creatures, because this is basically vanilla, you're not really exploiting with it, except unless your opponent's at 2 or something along those lines, or you have a pacifism creature. The cheap vanilla creatures are a lot better now because there are good ways to devour them for benefit. So, yeah, you're going to play this card a lot more often than you would just based on its own power level.
Right. But very, you can get that very, very late in the draft. All right, this next guy, I wonder if you've played with or against this creature yet. It's Sabertooth Outrider. It's the 3 and a red 4/2 with trample. And whenever it attacks, if you've got Formidable, it gets first strike too.
This card is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's an aggressive attacker that if you have a combat trick, it does a bunch of damage because it does trample. And then it's half of Formidable already.
That's the thing.
You just wait like a turn and it's already on.
Yeah. And that's what I've noticed is that, you cast it, you say go or whatever. And then when it comes back to you can play a creature often, to get yourself to Formidable, pretty easily. And then it crunches in and it's actually like, now I can see why there's these 1/6s and 2/5s everywhere. Like this thing's a real pain. It does, you can't block it easily, and it combos with combat tricks really well.
It does. It's one of the cards that things work out pretty well for you when you have ways to work with it, and it doesn't really need that much help to begin with.
No. One interesting play that I considered, I don't know if it'll actually work out that way, but, if you had a pump spell, there could be a scenario where you would play a pump spell before combat, right? To get yourself to Formidable so that you can attack with it and get the first strike in the scenario where it kind of doesn't matter that they know that it has first strike. It's like, you're going to get them, because if you cast it after attacks, it's too late, right? And then you just need the pump spell to get the toughness up to get over the creature that's blocking or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Champion of Erishin is next. That's 3 and a white for a 3/2 lifelink.
Yeah, this is basically just filler. It works with combat tricks because you gain a little bit of extra life, but you're not really excited about this card.
Oh, I like this next one. Gurmag Drowner.
Gurmag Drowner is one of the cards that has impressed me the most.
Yeah, this guy's definitely done serious work. That's the 3 and a blue 2/4 with exploit, and when it exploits, you get to look at the top 4 of your library. Put 1 in your hand and the rest in your graveyard.
Yeah, it turns one of your creatures into a forbidden alchemy, and it turns out that's a powerful effect. If you have good cards to dig into and graveyard synergies, then this card is just right up your alley, and it just works with cards like Palace Familiar and Dutiful Attendants. This is one of the exploit cards that you should draft like the exploit deck around. This is one of your engines because it finds you your other good cards, your other exploit cards.
Totally, yeah. And if you can pick up some Delve, I found Gurmag Angler I had with this thing, and I felt like I was kind of comboing off. I mean, I was taking the best of my 4 and then playing an Angler the next turn. It was really good. Uh-oh.
Is this a Megamorph?
Conifer Strider.
Oh, okay. That's better.
No, that hasn't happened. I may have dodged that bullet. We'll see. So Conifer Strider, of course, is the 5/1 for 3 and a green with hexproof, aka the LSV Slayer.
Yeah, I did lose to that card. Though, I want to say that, I mean,
you were going to wreck that card. You needed a swamp.
Well, yeah, I had Typhoid Rats in hand, but
yes. Maybe you should have played
Conifer Strider is. I haven't really changed my evaluation of it. I mean,
no,
it is the kind of card that can steal wins. I mean, that is what happened, right? Like it was one of the better cards to have in that situation. The situation being I can't cast black spells.
Yeah,
but it still requires work to be good because otherwise, by itself, it just trades for any 2-drop or greater, or 1-drop. Actually, just trades for any card. So you really need permanent pump spells for it to be good, because casting even just 1 pump spell, it doesn't really do that much.
No, it's just 1 for 1, and unless the board stays clear, yeah, shrinks up pretty quickly. Next we've got Taigom's Strike. That's 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn, and then it's got Rebound. I just don't like cards like this. I can see their utility in certain matchups, but for the most part, I like to try to have my creatures kind of do the walk-in for themselves, where I don't have to spend a 4-mana sorcery speed combat trick just to get in for damage. If you don't have a good board, if you're falling behind, if you are already behind, Taigom Strike just doesn't do anything. This is just the type of card that I really tend to avoid in Limited.
It's the kind of card that you're going to play like 1 out of every 5 or 6 blue decks, I think. Though, when you actively want this card in your deck, when you put it in your deck and are happy about it, the card's excellent. Because it's something like, 8 to 10 damage without doing a whole lot of work.
Yeah.
But there's just not that many blue decks that actually want that.
Yeah, it's just so risky. Although it is sitting right next to Conifer Strider, and now my brain's
that is a combo.
Yeah. All right, this next one, Silumgar Butcher. So this is the 5-mana. Oh wow, it's a 5-drop zombie. John will like that. It's a 4 and a black for the 3/3 with exploit, and if you exploit, you can give a creature -3/-3 until end of turn. This one is. This one jumped out to me early on. It's just like, oh wow, they pushed exploit, they went for it, right? You're going to be able to draw cards and kill creatures and stuff. But I have to say that Silumgar Butcher, while good, like I think it's my pick right now out of the pack. Maybe Drowner, I don't know. But anyway, I'm not sure that it's like a super powerhouse card either.
It's definitely not. It's an extra mana over Gurmag Angler or the Voltress Haven. So that extra mana.
You mean the Drowner? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Drowner. That extra mana with basically the same stats and still slightly a pretty equivalent effect is just not a great deal. It's still a fine card, and if you have cards that work with this, good fodder to sacrifice, you will play this card. I think this is a little bit less of an engine than the 2 4-drops that draw you cards.
Yeah, you're definitely still playing it. Next is Evolving Wilds. Pretty tame in this set. You can set up a few decent splashes or just help fix your mana a bit. But, so far, I've only played against 2-color decks or two color decks with splashes, and Evolving Wilds is certainly the card you want if you're going to be doing a little splashing. Sandcrafter Mage is next. That's the 2 and a white 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you bolster 1. I got my eye on Sandcrafter Mage. I haven't played with her against it yet, but gosh, this card just seems good to me. It's like that's just a very solid 3-drop in my mind. There's really no reason not to put this card in your deck if you have white mana in your deck. It's a very solid card. Yeah.
It's not a card I want to first pick, certainly, but
no, it's a little boring for that.
It's a 3-mana 3/3. It's very close to that, and you'd always play that card, and you'd be happy about it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, this next one, I'm still having a hard time figuring out how good it actually is, but I had somebody, in fact, it was Adam Prozac, he played it against me, and I was very jealous. It's called Sight Beyond Sight, and it's 3 and a blue for a sorcery. And you get to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand and one on the bottom of your library, but it's got Rebound. So you get to do this twice. It's sort of a look back to a card called Sleight of Hand that lets you do this once for just blue. But they don't print those as often anymore.
I do like this card. I
kind of do too. Like, watch it. Like, I hate the idea of sorcery speed tapping 4 mana and just doing nothing. But when he picked up 2 cards, thought about it, picked 1, and I'm just like, oh, he gets to do that again? Like, I don't know. That does seem like you're digging through your library pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's a draw 2, but you get to look at the 4 cards when you're picking your 2. So,
wait a minute, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, I mean that is a good card. So.
Yeah. So it really this is like quite comparable then to what's it called?
4C?
No, not 4C. Although
Bitter Revelation.
Yeah, Bitter Rev is what I was thinking of.
Yeah. But it is comparable to Bitter Revelation. It does not have quite the same synergy with Delve.
Yeah.
But it has more synergy with Prowess, so.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair trade, especially in this set. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know where to pick that, though. Like, I'm still very wary of 4 mana draw spells at sorcery speed. Like, that's pretty sketchy to me, but I don't know. Like, this one does seem to pay you back. I want to play with that card. Lightning Berserkers are next uncommon. And that's the red 1/1 with Fire Breathing. You can pay a red to give it +1/+0 until end of turn, and it's got Dash for red. This thing's a beater.
It's a beater, but this is kind of the same reason I don't like the Conifer Strider is that it trades for everything, and this time you even have to pay mana to make it so. When they block with a 2/3 or something, you have to spend 2 mana. I just don't think you're going to get through for enough damage with this, and you're not going to be playing like 13 mountains in your deck.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually not a huge fan of this card either, although I do appreciate the dash. All right, our last uncommon is Foul Tongue Invocation. That's 2 and a black. Target player sacrifices a creature, but as you cast it, if you control a dragon or reveal a dragon from your hand, you're going to gain 4 life too.
Yeah, it's an
edict effect, right?
Yeah, it's an edict effect, which tend to not be fantastic and limited, just because people just have random creatures in play, and in this format especially, they're going to have cards that give them benefits when they die, just because there are a lot of those cards in this format. So it's weaker than in most formats, and edicts were already not that great to begin with. They just kill your opponent's worst creature, and it's limited. They have a lot of creatures.
Yeah, and people play bad creatures too. So you're actually kind of helping them out a little bit. I would play this card in a black deck, but I'm definitely willing to board it out, and I'm definitely not taking it this highly. Oh, interesting. All right, buddy. Well, we got a really good rare. In fact, Mythic. We got Sarkhan Unbroken.
Yeah, this is one of the more interesting ones.
Yeah, and so I'll read it real quick just to go over it for those that missed the set review or forgot what he does. But there's I think a bigger discussion to be had from this. So Sarkhan Unbroken is 2 colorless for 2 colorless and green, blue, red. So 5 mana total for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker Sarkhan. You can +1 him to draw a card and add a mana of any color to your mana pool. You can -2 him to make a 4/4 red dragon flying creature token, and you can -8 him to go get all the dragons in your deck and put them on the battlefield. So clearly, he should be carded Sarkhan Broken, right? Like, because if you resolve this thing in limited, you are way ahead of your opponent. You can draw extra cards, you can make dragons, you can do both. Card's insane. The real question, though, that I have about Sarkhan Unbroken is that mana, right? It's 3 different colors. It's Teamer. We're used to playing those back in cons, but this is not cons. And you don't get to just play 3-color decks anymore. So you're committing quite hard here to 2 of these 3 colors, probably, and to picking up some cards that help you splash as well.
Yeah, actually, in the draft I just did right before we recorded this, I was a blue-black control deck, and I had a Mastery of the Unseen that ended up in my sideboard, despite it being a very good card, because I was on the lookout, but I never found a single black, white, or blue land, or a land in those 3 colors.
Yeah, there's only one pack with those dual lands.
There's only one pack, and then there's, and you get to see 8 total of those lands. So, and I didn't get Mastery, of course, until pack 3, because that's where the card comes. So I didn't prioritize Evolving Wilds at any point, because just when you're playing 2 colors, you don't really need to prioritize it. So you could end up in that situation where you just can't find the lands, in which case playing something like Sarkhan is going to be difficult. It's not impossible. I mean, I've played 8/7/3 mana bases before, where, if you're like red, blue, splash 3 forests, that is passable, but honestly, you'd really much rather have something being able to go like 8/8/2 and then have one of the 8 be a dual land on your 3rd color.
Right. So, yeah. See, and this seems like pretty difficult to do. So, the burning question then becomes Sarkhan Unbroken. Like, we can still take him and just risk it. Is it worth it? How do you process that?
Well, I think it is worth it. It's not a huge risk because it's not that hard to pick up like one land. And if you first pick Sarkhan, first of all, you get to take Evolving Wilds a little higher, which most people aren't really going to be going after that card. So you should be able to get Evolving Wilds like 5th pick, and that doesn't cost you a ton.
There's one in this pack too that you could potentially wheel.
It's possible, yeah. The other thing is, if you know that you want to splash Sarkhan, and so you take Sarkhan first, right? And you kind of see which of red, blue, and green are the most open. Let's say you settle into like blue-green, just picking at random. You can draft your deck so you're not taking a ton of double-colored cards, so that even if you don't get lands, you can still have a playable mana base. Like even just by running, in that case, a few mountains? Yeah, you can run something like 8 islands, 7 forests, 3 mountains, and I think if you've drafted so that you have only single-colored green spells, for example, that's probably fine.
Huh. That's interesting. I think obviously power level-wise, Sarkhan out of this pack is not remotely close to anything else in it, but it is interesting to think that, this could be a card that would be really difficult to resolve. And, I wonder if, You know, what was it? What was the other card that we really liked here? There's a Butcher and a Drowner.
Yeah,
I mean, are you taking it? Like, let's say that you're at the PT, you know, and you open this thing up. You're just windmilling it, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely taking the Sarkhan here. There's nothing at near this power level, and even if you have to factor in the fact that you're going to take a 3-color card like Sarkhan and you're going to end up putting it in your deck, you know, not a huge percentage of the time, that's still worth it, because when you can cast Sarkhan, let's say a Sarkhan costs 5 colorless, I mean, the power level would be, you know, something like an 8.5 out of 10. Maybe more, because it comes into play, makes a dragon, and then if your opponent can't kill Sarkhan, you get to draw an extra card, then make another dragon. That's a pretty good deal.
It's just absurd. Yeah. No, for sure. The power level's there. Yeah, I'm taking Sarkhan as well, though. I definitely feel weird about it. I do like that I can pick basically any of the 2 colors to go into as my base colors, and I also like the fact that green exists on this card, just because, you know, there's a better chance that I could pick up a color fixer in green down the line. But yeah, interesting stuff. You know, I think it's like you said, I think that the main thing to think about when you take a Sarkhan is to not fall in love, right? I mean, be willing to say, okay, Sarkhan's not going to make the cut in my deck if I just can't cast it. Cause I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen people just stubbornly, you know, try to build their deck around a card, just a one single card, and just make their deck way worse, you know, trying to accommodate a card like Sarkhan Unbroken.
Yeah, if you're going to take Sarkhan first pick, you really need to do it with the awareness that if some combination of these colors isn't open, then you're not going to play it. If you end up with a good, strong 2-color deck and no fixing, you're not going to play it. You just can't assume that this is 80% to make your deck. It's not that high.
There you go. Okay, so let's move on from the Crack-a-Packs here. As part of the Crack-a-Packs, which is of course what they're for, we discussed some of the cards that we've seen and that have changed and that kind of stuff. But I also want to take a look at, you know, sort of our Dragons of Tarkir initial impressions. Luis, you and I have both had a chance to do at least a few drafts each and start to get a feel for how the format's playing out. We haven't done enough to come down with any conclusions or anything, but I'm definitely, you know, starting to develop my preferences and figure out where I want to go. What stood out for you so far?
I'm actually in an interesting spot with Dragon's Draft here. And, you know, I think it's way more useful to the show where I am now than a lot of places I could have started. So what I'm talking about is that of the drafts I've done, I've drafted blue-black 3 times of the 4 drafts I've done.
I did the same thing.
That's not a bad thing. And the reason I think it's good is, let's say we had each drafted four different of the color combinations out of the 10, even though they're not, you know, divided evenly because there's some different incentives running around. But let's say we each drafted 4 of those. I think we would be a lot less confident in our assertions. But because we've combined drafted blue-black, you know, something like 6 times, we can be a little bit more confident when we talk about the strategy behind blue-black and where it fits in the format and what the card valuations are.
No, that's a good point.
Which I think is net better, because normally we would have more knowledge spread out but less high confidence knowledge. Now we have a little more narrow of a scope, but still I think we have a lot better experience with that aspect than we would if we had drafted a bunch of different things.
No, you're right. That is true. My normal mentality is I want to try to go for as many different things to try to learn as much, you know, from in a wide way as possible, right? But that makes good sense. I mean, I've done 2 sealeds and 2 drafts, and and 3 of those 4 decks were blue-black. The last one was not. It was blue-white. Because I opened Ojutai Exemplars. Yeah, that's a real card. Anyway, so let's talk about blue-black then. Initial take on blue-black. What do you think?
I think it's awesome. It's the kind of deck I love drafting. So my, you know, kind of my main, attitude when going into blue-black was not that I like think I'm blue-black after pack 2 or pick 2 or anything, but once you're in blue-black, like a control-ish deck, is that you really just want to draw cards and kill your opponent's creatures and eventually kill your opponent. And that's a pretty awesome deck to be in. I love drafting decks like that. So I think the key cards that I've seen are first of all, the various exploit cards that draw you cards, the 2 different 4-drops.
Yeah, so the Vulturous Aven and the Gurmag Drowner, those are absolutely premium.
Combined with cards like Palace Familiar, Dutiful Attendant, Jeskai Sage, and Sultai Emissary.
Yes.
If you're lucky, you can get Youthful Scholar, the 3 and a blue for a 2/2 that dies to draw 2 cards.
I am not lucky so far.
Yeah, that card is awesome. I mean, by itself, it's just a great card. So he already just brawls with any 2/2 and just draws you 2 cards. Which is insane.
I already know that's going to be the card I want to open the most, you know, out of this format by the time it gets rolling.
if you had to make a list of, cards that are reasonable to open, that's not the top of the list. Obviously, you'd rather just open Dragonlord Silumgar every time. But,
which I also did, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I had that in my draft just now. So, yeah, Dragonlord Silumgar is good.
You also passed Dragonlord of Tarkir.
Yes, the pack I had a Dragonlord Silumgar and a foil Dragonlord of Tarkir. I beat the deck that had Dragonlord of Tarkir in it, so I feel vindicated.
Yes, you did.
So, besides the exploit like chain, the low drops and the medium drops that sacrifice them, you also just have decent removal. Blue-black just has good removal. It has flatten, and, like uncommons like Deathwind from the dragons, but it also still has Whisk Away and Reach of Shadows from, Fate Reforged. You have cards like Contradict, which fits really well in this deck. I wouldn't mind playing even like 2 in a blue-black deck that's just going to keep its mana up. And you have cards like Anticipate that let you look at extra cards. Like the deck is very consistent because it's not trying to curve out, because it has a lot of cards that draw extra cards. It's going to have a pretty consistent draw of what it's trying to do. Whereas an aggressive deck, if it misses its 2-drop, it's in a lot more trouble.
It's funny, looking like, so I came to very similar conclusions that you did very quickly, especially about the key exploit cards and the ones that being the ones that draw you cards. The Vulturous Aven has been kind of my all-star so far. But the Gurmag Drowner has absolutely been fantastic too. So that part I was like, okay, these are great. I thought these would be great. They have been. So check that box. So the next struggle though is, well, what exactly am I sacrificing here? Right? Like how does this part work? Because I have a certain amount of creatures, in my deck total. I try to draft the best creatures I can, right? Like I'm not trying to draft bad creatures just to sacrifice. I want to have all good creatures, or at least as close as I can get, and then figure out what to sacrifice at the time. And the ones that have jumped out, really, like Palace Familiar is really high on the list for me of just exactly what I want to be doing. It trades off for some pretty important cards like that you'll see in the format, the early drops, which is insane. And then it also just sort of pecks away in the air for a while, which if the board is a little bit stalled out, or if you're ahead, you can actually get a few points of damage out of it, which is, well, more than, I would hope for that type of card. And of course you can use it to chump block something huge and get a card out of it, effectively gaining you, 5, 6, 7 life, something like that, if it's a big creature. But when it comes time to exploit, it just feels dirty when you play your Vulturous Aven and then just sacrifice that thing, and you're just like drawing cards, draw 2 more cards, and your opponent's just like, really? And you're like, yeah, well, this is what this is supposed to do. So we've established that that's good, and that's the plan, right? Like if I could just build the deck, it would have those type of cards. You mentioned a couple of others that are good to sack, like Jeskai Sage. But the real question I have is, when do I take the fodder, right? When do I take those Palace Familiars? Because for me, they're very valuable for the deck, but I don't know that necessarily makes them a high pick as far as, when I'm drafting the cards.
I haven't actually settled on that yet. It is interesting because cards like, Palace Familiar was Surveilling Sprites in the original Ravnica, and I liked the card back then, but there wasn't any particular special synergy with it. So it was a card you could get pretty reliably like 7th to 8th, 9th pick. Mm-hmm. I suspect Palace Familiar is just going to go earlier than that.
I know. That's what I think too. I'm starting to feel the pressure already, because those are ideal things to sacrifice. And what I've noticed is that there's a big drop off when you go to the next wave, which is either cards that you just would rather have on the battlefield in many ways, or crappy cards like the Drain one that we talked about, the 1/3 for 1 and a black. Like, I would be quite happy to not have to run a Karsi Sadist in my deck if possible. Right now, I've done it. Right? Just so that I have things to do early and then that I can sacrifice to my exploit creatures later. But I'm still figuring out that balance. Another thing that I'm curious about is how many exploit creatures can I run? It took us a little bit to get our footing when it came to Delve. How many big Delve spells can we realistically justify in your average deck? And, we kind of figured that out at some point. And with these though, I'm like, well, I don't know yet. Like, if I have 6 good exploit creatures, like, am I happy about that? Or am I like kind of looking at my creature base? Like, well, if these all eat something to make them good and this is the rest of my creatures, like I'm not left with much. Right. And, so I'm still trying to find that balance too. Right now I've been trying to kind of push it and just take all of the Vulturous Avens that I see. And and Gurmag Drowners and Butchers and stuff. And, maybe that just balances itself out naturally because you just don't get that many of those. But I don't really feel fully, settled in on exactly where that balance lies yet.
I think that you can go pretty deep on them. It's not like these cards literally don't work. Like Vulture's Haven's a 4-mana 2/4 or 2/3 flyer. 4-mana 2/3 flyers are fine to cast. You can cast it on turn 4 and you definitely aren't embarrassed. So, and these cards do draw cards and filter through your deck. So even if you're filling your deck with some low drops you wouldn't normally want to enable them, you do get to like kind of move past those when you're casting Gurmag Drowner and sacking your, garbage 2-drop. Let's say you're playing like Kolagon Skirmisher, right? In a deck that doesn't really want a random 2/2 for 2.
Yeah. When
you sack it to Gurmag Drowner and you see a bad 2-drop on land and then 2 decent cards, you get to pick one of the decent cards. You don't have to take the bad cards. So,
truth. Right.
I do think that exploit cards stack a lot better than delve cards. It is true that you could not play 5 expensive delve cards in your deck and expect it to go well. I think you can probably play like 6 or 7 exploit cards in your deck if you get that many, and you just have to put low drops in. But if you do, then you're doing all right. Basically, Butcher turns your 2-mana 2/2 into a Last Gasp, into a -3/-3, and that's a pretty good upgrade. It's worth playing the medium to bad card in order to have that access to that.
Now, what about for finishers? Because what I've noticed is similar to what you said earlier, that these decks tend to play out like a very traditional limited control deck where you're using you're either leveraging your board state or using actual removal spells to kill all your opponent's creatures, and then you clean them up with whatever's left over. And sometimes that's some flyers. I've definitely noticed that that's a thing of the Aven, once again, maybe even just a Palace Familiar or whatever. The Megamorph flyer, the 4/2 after it Megamorphs.
Yeah, Ojutai's Interceptor.
Ojutai's Interceptor has been very solid. Like that's a really quick clock.
I think Interceptor plus Contradict's one of my new favorite combos.
Oh, that is nice.
The combo where you just cast Interceptor on turn 3, and then on like turn 5 or 6, you leave Contradict up, and if your opponent doesn't do anything, you just flip into a 4/2 flyer, hit him for 4, and leave Contradict up.
Yeah, that's not bad.
That sequence of plays is really not that bad.
It's really not that bad. And Contradict comes to mind too, just as like we mentioned earlier, maybe, but it's a card that I think is a little better than I thought. I don't think it's a lot better than I thought, but I think it's decent. I'd love to run one of them. I've just found that if you're ahead, it's great. And if you're at parity, it's fine. Like, you just keep it up. And if they play something that's really scary that you can't deal with, or even just it puts them, from being a parity to being ahead in some way, you can just fire off your Contradict, you get the card back, and it's not that big of a downside. Now, admittedly, if your opponent goes like 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop on you, and you're looking at a Contradict, you're probably not going to be super happy with it. But I found that like there's enough scenarios there where I've been able to not hate having a Contradict, and I think it's gone up a little bit for me. I played it in 2 of my 4 decks so far.
Yeah, so far I've been happy to play 1, and in the deck I just had, happy to play 2.
Yeah. What about cards from Fate Reforged? Has anything changed in your mind from, evaluation standpoint now that we've got the new set?
Certainly. So there's a couple of things going on with Fate Reforged. One, and people have been asking this question in particular a lot, which, it's a relevant question. You do need to kind of figure out what has changed, because you can't autopilot through Fate Reforged packs anymore and be like, well, this card's better than this card, because some cards have definitely changed.
Definitely.
But the biggest change to Fate Reforged isn't that we're drafting it with another set. It's that we're drafting it 3rd instead of 1st.
Yes, that's huge, right?
Right. You don't need to evaluate these Fate Reforged cards against each other and nothing else. You need to evaluate them against the deck you already have.
Yes.
So in that sense, it's much easier to draft Fate Reforged than it used to be. It used to be like, well, I don't know if I want Typhoid Rats, or, Gurmag Angler, or I don't know if I want, Aven Surveyor or Lotus Path Djinn, or, or right into being Lotus Path Djinn's even a little closer, for example. Now it's like, well, look at your deck and see what your deck wants.
Yes.
And so you should be basically reevaluating all the Fate Reforged cards, but you have a much easier context to evaluate them in. You have so much more information. So Fate Reforged, I think, legitimately is much easier to draft, but it's still worth mentioning the cards that have changed significantly, like Reach of Shadows and Lotus Path Djinn, for example. Those are just good cards. They remain good cards.
But they look better now to me.
Yeah, I mean,
because they were up against like more regular morphs and 3-color cards, like they had a lot of competition, and they were good in that format. But now that we have just like an air quotes normal 2-color format, it's like all of a sudden like Lotus Path Djinn is just like, oh yeah, wow. Like card's good. Like I want to get a few of those, where before I played it, it's not like I didn't play it, but like, yeah, there was a lot of other stuff competing for that slot. I've been impressed by those cards. What was the other one you mentioned?
Well, Reach of Shadows and Lotus Path Djinn were the two I was talking about, but yeah, I mean, it's true that they're better in the format, but they also, their valuation when compared to other Fate Reforged cards, I don't think has changed much. Like,
no, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So I think, like, in terms of, you will not be picking these drastically different. The one card I think that's by far gained the most is Gurmag Angler. Gurmag Angler is now the only good Delve card, and therefore he's not competing, or she, I don't know, Gurmag Angler, whatever that grotesque fish is not competing with any other good Delve cards. You're not having to worry about whether you want to play Gurmag Angler, Treasure Cruise, Shambling Attendants, Hooting Mandrills. It's just Gurmag Angler and I guess Will of the Naga, but I can kind of set that one aside. So Gurmag Angler is just a 2 to 3 mana 5/5. Not on turn 2 or 3, obviously, on turn 6 or 7, but I've been very impressed with Gurmag Angler.
I have too.
I'm taking Gurmag Angler, much, much earlier now.
I am too, man. I had the exact same experience, especially in combination with the Gurmag Drowner. It turns out they're good friends. And that has been really, really impressive because my blue-black control deck could out-creature a red-green, formidable deck. I mean, my creature was just bigger than what they were doing. The 4/2 first strike, it's like, yeah, well, or the 4/2 trample they can get first strike. I mean, you're like, yeah, well, I've got a 5/5. Like, beat that. And I paid 3 mana for it and left up another ability or whatever. Yeah. I've been super, super impressed. I mean, that card went up and up and up for me in the previous format. And here I'm just like, it feels kind of unfair when you play it.
It is at a different power level than most of the other cards around it. It's turned from being one of many, decent cards to be one of the best cards, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Going back to what you were just saying about how you don't have to evaluate these cards in a pack one. I think that's super fascinating. And it came up in a conversation I was having with my friend Adam, who's recently learned Magic. And he has done a couple of drafts so far, one with me and a couple on his own, but they were kind of like the new player drafts on Magic Online. He's still getting his feet. And I'm trying to get him set up so that he can start drafting when the new set comes out on Magic Online. And this will be his first set that he's drafted. And he was concerned, he's like, well, I don't know the cards from the previous set. He listened to the set review for this one. He's got a spreadsheet, like he's all set up on Dragons, but he was worried about Fate Reforged. And, I said, it's funny because by the time you get to that pack, you can just eliminate all the cards that aren't your colors, and you're going to be looking at like 2 or 3 cards, that you have to choose from. So, and he has enough, knowledge now to be able to just read those cards on the fly and kind of get an idea for what he wants to do. And it's like, I had to explain to him that this isn't how it normally goes, right? Normally you'd be drafting 3 different sets and it would be kind of throwing him into the deep end. But here it's like, if he concentrates on Dragons, that's 2 of the 3 packs. By the time he gets to Fate Reforged, he's kind of on autopilot anyway. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you can look at the Fate Reforged cards not really in a completely new light, just in a slightly different context. But again, I think it's easier to draft Fate Reforged now. I don't think that you have to completely reevaluate the cards.
Do you think it changes the bomby nature of the set? I remember that was one of the big complaints about that set, was that people felt like the rares were too strong and that you kind of were forced to take your rare early too often for some people's taste. I didn't actually think it was that bad, but I definitely, some people I respect, thought that. Does it change anything now that or do those rares just end up getting to the people that they need to get to anyway?
It does change things because Fate Reforged has more busted rares than Dragons. By the time you get to Fate Reforged, someone can legitimately open, even a card as good as Citadel Siege and just not be able to play it. Like, you could have, a very good red-green deck and you open Citadel Siege and it's like, well, it's just not realistic for me to play this card. Whereas before, when you open Citadel Siege, you're going to take it and play it every time. So right. I think that you're going to see that spread out a little bit more, though. In that case, you're still going to face someone who has it. Someone's going to play that card.
Okay, yeah, for sure. What else stood out to you about Fate Reforged?
Cards like Mardu Scout got better because cards that cost double mana or double colored mana, which Mardu Scout was the biggest example I could find because it's a card you really want to play on turn 2.
Summit Prowler, while not in Fate, but that was one that jumped out too.
Yeah, they got better because you're going to just be playing like 9/8, 9/9 mana bases, 10/7 mana bases a lot more often than you used to be able to. Also, Murder Scout belongs to a tribe of dash creatures, and cards with dash got better because now there's an actual dash deck you can draft.
Mm-hmm.
So, but by the time you get to Fate Reforged, you'll know whether you have Warbringer or not. You'll know whether you have the Ambuscade Shaman. So you're not evaluating these like maybe I'll get this deck. It's like you know if you're in this deck, and if you are, these cards are better.
By the way, our coverage boss, Greg, both your and my boss for coverage, he drafted a dash deck. I asked him, before we played, because we were kind of all learning and, work research and stuff. And I said, I know you have a lot of dash, but would you consider this a dash deck? He's like, yeah, it's a dash deck. And the reason why I asked him was because he was playing in the match next to me, and I looked over, and he played our boy Warbringer, and then the next turn attacked for 16. He just like emptied his whole hand of dash creatures and crunched real hard. So yeah, that is definitely a thing. But like you said, knowing whether you have the Warbringer or not makes those picks in Fate Reforged a lot easier.
Definitely.
All right, what else we got here? There was another card I wanted to talk about from the new set, and you know what? It is slipping my mind right now. If I remember though, I'll bring us back to it. But for now, let's keep the conversation flowing here, because we've got a few other topics that I actually wanted to talk about, Luis. First, I wanted to talk about the Magic Online Legacy Cube. I've been dying to talk about this for a while because there were some major changes made to it. And so far, a lot of them haven't gone over that well in the community, to be honest. The biggest change as far as sheer numbers of cards went, and I was a little sad about this, was the cheap black sort of aggressive creatures that were in the Legacy Cube on Magic Online got taken out. So these are your cards like Diregraph, Ghoul, Carnophage, these 2/2s for black that sometimes have a downside and sometimes don't. And the reasoning was sound. There really wasn't a deck that wanted them in there. Now, I, of course, had something to say about that because my favorite deck to draft in Cube is a blue-black tempo aggressive deck that relies pretty heavily on those 1-drops. Now, the problem is I couldn't actually make that argument because the reason why the blue-black tempo deck can exist at all, and not that it's one of the premier archetypes or anything, it's just my personal favorite.
Not even close.
It's okay, though. It's a good deck. It's not a great deck. But the only reason it could exist in any capacity is because you can spend your early picks on the really good blue and black tempo cheap cards, the counters and the hand disruption and those type of things.
So the good cards, yeah.
The good cards. And then you could just wheel every single one of those 1-drops because nobody ever drafted them. And so if I were to raise my hand and say, hey, you can't take these out, my reasoning would be the same reasoning that they got taken out, which is that nobody ever drafts them. So that didn't fly. So they did get taken out, but the controversy came in with what they were replaced with, which ended up being Vampire Tribal. And, when most people, I think when they first saw it were kind of like, what the hell? I know I was like, this does not seem like the direction that would be obvious. But, I talked to Randy about it. He's on the team that does that. He kind of heads that up, and he's like, look, nobody was playing these other things. So we're going to try something new. And if it doesn't fly, fine. That's an experiment that we're willing to take, but we need to put something in these slots, and this is what we came up with. And, as it turns out, when you draft it, I mean, the vampire deck is like, look, I'm not one to, come down on a judgment on a thing before I've tried it out, but I am one to do it after I've tried it out, and that deck sucks. Those vampires go around the table freely, and they really push the power level down with them. I mean, there's some really crappy ones in there. Even if the deck sometimes does come together, it's still not worth it. The deck didn't end up being a big powerhouse. What are your thoughts on the vampires in the Legacy Cube?
I have to preface it by saying,
you had to clear your throat. Holy smokes! This is serious business. No, I have to preface it by saying that black is the color that struggled the most in just about any cube you can make. It's the black sheep of the colors in that. What black does when you compare all the historical great cards in Magic, and a Legacy Cube certainly qualifies because that you're talking about very high powered cards, just isn't good enough to compete with like
basically all the other colors. The other colors just have stronger themes.
Yes.
So I think coming from the perspective that there aren't that many different ways you can make black be good in the cube is that, starting from there, I have a lot of tolerance for trying stuff. So I think it's very good to try stuff. As it turns out, vampires is not the answer. Right. I suspect the next iteration will not have them. Actually, one of the funniest things I saw was Owen Turtenwald said on Twitter that he would give someone $1 billion if they can provide evidence that they won a match with vampires. and someone immediately tweeted at him, cash or check is fine, and a picture. And the picture was the guy very clearly had just won a modern 2-man with Infect, drew black mana symbols on the lands, and photoshopped a Baron Sengir into play.
I missed that. That's great.
And it was so good. And the guy had the deck open on the side and he wrote Vampire Cube deck or something on the
That's
side.
Amazing.
And the prize had popped up, and it was the prize from a 2-player queue, and had photoshopped in 12 Phantom points or whatever, but with MS Paint.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that's funny. I think that the tweet that preceded that from Owen was he tweeted, "Drafting vampires like it's my job."
Yeah.
He was certainly one that was willing to dip his toe in that particular pool and see what was what, but I don't think he liked what he found.
Owen loves Cube, and every time the Cube's out on Magic Online, he plays a ton of it. And he forced vampires over and over again until he realized he was never winning. So
that just makes me laugh too. I would have paid to see Owen's reaction in real time. But. Yeah,
it was incredible. But so even if vampires wasn't great, I think it won't end up getting there. Greg Hatch, another dude who's done a lot of really awesome streaming and really likes brewing decks. He went something like 18-0 forcing mono black, and not vampires, mono black like mid range or control.
I saw that.
So he likes a different set of black cards, and I think that a lot of the powerful black cards are still in the cube. I think that vampires is going to change. I probably would recommend not drafting it, but I don't think it's bad. Saying we did this thing and it didn't work is not to say you shouldn't have done this thing.
No, there's no shame in that. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to bring it up, was just that, sure, this one's not going to fly this time, and that's fine. But
you shouldn't judge something solely on results unless it's drafting Clone Legion, in which case you should.
Yeah, right. So there's always be aware of the exceptions. But yeah, but that sums it up, though. Okay, so let's talk about the next thing that came out on Magic Online, which was pretty exciting, though. I have to say I'm super bummed that I didn't actually get to do this. Was Rise of the Eldrazi drafts came back for a stretch. Rise of the Eldrazi is on my top 3 all-time draft formats. It's the first draft format for me that I truly fell in love with, right? That I was just like, this is the best. I get it. I went deep. I remember feeling like I could almost pick it random and make it work somehow. I just knew all the cards, and it was also the format where I developed my love for a niche archetype. In this case, I fell in love with the Vent Sentinel deck. You can look that one up if you haven't drafted Rise. But this was an important set for me in my development as a limited player, because it taught me to push boundaries and to try different things. And I was pretty early on the Vent Sentinel train as far as Magic Online went, and I was getting them all and started winning a lot. And it was a real eye opener for me. So the set means a lot to me. It's one of my favorite ones to draft. And it came back. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have time to actually draft it. I was doing cube videos for ChannelFireball, so some of my drafts were that, and then I drafted the cube more often as well. So sadly, I'll have to wait for the next run, but that's not actually why I wanted to bring this up. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because they introduced a new type of queue. It's called a 6-2-2-2. And, real quickly, for those of you that are on Magic Online, you'll already know this, but if you're not, when you play a draft, there's 8 people in the draft, and, they're going to distribute some type of prize packs to those 8 players. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But currently there's 3 main ways that this goes. You can play an 8-4, where the first place player gets 8 booster packs and the second gets 4 and everybody else gets nothing. So basically you got to make the finals. Those are single elimination as well. If you lose in the first round, you're just out. The next one is called a 4-3-2-2, and you can figure out how the pack distribution goes there. But of course, the primary thing being that if you make it past the first round, you're guaranteed at least 2 packs. but the ceiling's only 4. So, it's a flatter payout, but the notable difference there being that 8 plus 4 is 12 and 4, 3, 2, 2 equals 11. So they're actually one booster pack short. And that's a topic that we've beaten to death on this podcast since its inception, that you just don't play those, because there's another option called Swiss, which isn't really a really great name for it. But basically for Swiss, it is played in Swiss, so you get to play every round. So that part's accurate, but it doesn't really describe the payout. And the payout is every match you win, you get a booster pack. And if you run the numbers on that, that's 12 booster packs total given. So it has the same prize pool as an 8-4. And again, one extra booster over the 4-3-2-2. And if you do the math on it, the basics of it are that if you're good enough at 4-3-2-2s to beat them at a clip so that you're making more than you could at Swiss, then you should be playing 8-4s. And if you're not, then you should just stick to Swiss. And that means that 4-3-2-2s are no man's land where you shouldn't go there. You're basically punting value every time you enter one, and you should do one or the other. Now, this has been a complaint on the show for a really long time, and there seems to be a bit of a reaction here. They're trying out a new queue for these Rise drafts called the 6-2-2-2, and it pays out like you'd think, but if you do the math, that's 12 packs. And that's pretty cool. It satisfies that urge that people have to say, okay, but if I make it past the first round, at least I get something, in this case, 2 booster packs. But it also puts the top end heavy enough so that the more spiky players that tend to draft in 8-4s more often, are still going to feel pretty good that, well, if I win the tournament, I'm going to get 6 booster packs, which is a pretty decent return. You're basically doubling, the number of packs that you put into it. And, I have to say, I think this is awesome. I think this is a really cool structure, and I'm super happy to see it happen. And I know that the Magic Online team recently put Lee Sharp, who's been involved in Magic Online in different capacities for years now, since I've been back to Magic. He's been down there crunching numbers and running things. But I know that this is part of his world now. He's been asking on Twitter quite a bit for feedback about stuff like this, and I'm assuming that, this was something that he pushed for to try to get the 6-2-2-2s tried out on these Rise drafts. And, I can say that at least just from social media and stuff, the response has been great. And I've been one of those people, giving a big high five to Lee and the guys down there for trying out 6-2-2-2s. Yeah,
I think it's a huge improvement because it lets people draft in a way that's not quite so all or nothing as 8-4 can feel like, especially, and I completely understand that you don't want to join a draft, and even if the equity is similar, knowing that if you lose round 2, then you're not getting anything, that can be disheartening, especially when you really have to look at your account before you draft again, when these packs actually do impact how many times you can draft. But it does that while still giving you a high enough reward to, have a good chance of stringing multiple drafts together. And you're not giving up value. The 4-3-2s, the fact that you had to give up value to play in them was just, heinous to me. Like I was not a big fan of that. So
yeah, that really just rubbed me the wrong way. But I love it to see when the Magic Online team is trying out new things and pushing in the right direction and getting good feedback for it. So when Lee asked on Twitter, I was really happy to see basically all the replies being positive and saying this is really cool. So maybe we can get these things, put into rotation, above 4-3-2-2s or in addition to, or however it works. But I think that's pretty exciting too.
Yeah, I think that you should draft Rise because it's great, and you should draft 6-2-2 because it's great. Luckily, they're both together. Though I'm still waiting for the 12-0 format. So,
that is the funny part. Remember the gold queues?
Oh yeah,
yeah. They have experimented with basically ratcheting up the prize payouts as much as possible. But, it's funny because I think I would actually play 12 zeros as well, just because I'm kind of a junkie like that. But that starts to push that envelope. And just to give the listeners a feel for what that means and why people say that the better players play the 8-4s is put yourself in Luis's seat. He's one of the best players ever to play the game. He wants to play for the highest stakes possible because he feels like he's going to win more often than the other people joining the draft. And he's more right than most people. And, what that means is that he wants to see these 12 twos. And I mean, I think you're partially joking, but I also think you would play in those. And, it's one of those things where that's what the 8-4 represents right now. It's the furthest you can get into that. Most players that play not as often or maybe not as well, right? They're still learning or, developing their skill set. They don't want to play something where they have to outright win the draft because they might not even be the best player in the draft. And, they probably don't expect to win it that often. So it is a scale that Wizards always has to play around with. And, I think that the reason people still played 4-3-2-2s, even after us yelling about it for years, is because it represents the middle ground. They don't feel like they're in the basement where they're like, oh, Swiss is for new players, which is not true, by the way. Swiss are great. But they didn't feel like they were ready to step up. It's a very natural thing to say, well, I'll just play in the middle where if I do pretty good, I can win some packs. And if I win, I'm actually turning a small profit. So I think that's acceptable to me, but it's just so easy to ignore the whole 11 packs versus 12 packs. And, if you run the numbers on that, it doesn't turn out well for you. Go ahead.
You don't really need to run the numbers to know that 12 is greater than 11. So
Yeah, I don't. Buddy, but do you? Yeah. I mean, you realize that for years those were the most popular.
I do, and I think for good reason. I understand why people like them. I'm just saying it's funny that it lasted that long, but I mean, if people were playing it, it's hard to like change something that's working.
Yeah, exactly. That was the thing. That was the whole push. Is that, and that's kind of why we took it to the airwaves here. I'm not some political activist on this show or something like that, but I remember I had tweeted it at Worth or something like that. And he's just like, look, people go in them. They want them. Like, what do you want from me? And I'm just kind of like, I can't really argue with the guy on that point. So I said, well, I'll tell people, to try to make those numbers change so that we can get 5-3-2-2s or maybe 6-2-2-2s like this one. All right. Next topic of discussion. I've been dying to talk to you about this, Luis. We were at Grand Prix Cleveland. What's that?
Let's just say that Marshall shoehorned this one in. My enthusiasm for the topic has diminished as I've seen literally millions of tweets.
Oh, you've been drowned out a little bit?
Well, just a lot of like your pick or
I hate that. I don't do that one. Yeah, I'm out on that one.
All I'm saying is there's a little bit of residual displeasure that my Twitter feed was less usable.
Okay, for the group, I will apologize because I find that very grating as well. So what we're talking about here though is a modern rotisserie draft. So what happened is Grand Prix Cleveland, out at dinner, BDM, Rashad, Randy. We're all chatting. And BDM or somebody says, well, what would you pick if you were drafting the modern format? So all the cards legal and modern face up, meaning just anyone you want. And you're the first person to go, with the first pick. And the way the draft works is there's 8 players and it goes 1 through 8. And then the 8th player gets the 9th pick as well. And it snakes back in the other direction. So the player with the first pick gets the 1st and 15th pick, for example. So, or 16th pick. So you look at it and all of a sudden we're all kind of looking at each other like, I think I would plant a flag and I would take like a Splinter Twin or something like that, and then, Randy was like, well, maybe you take like a Glistener Elf and you say, I'm the Infect guy. Nobody else wants to draft Infect. But then other people were like, well, don't you take like Lightning Bolt or something like that to kind of stay open? Because Lightning Bolt goes in a bunch of different decks. And, all of a sudden we've got an hour conversation on our hands. And as we're walking back to the hotel, weary from a hard day at work in the booth, we're kind of like, so we're doing this, right? Like this just kind of has to happen. And so since Randy, has been doing such a good job setting things up like, the VSL and now, the Standard Super League too, which by the way, you're going to be on, that's super exciting. If people are into watching Standard, you guys can, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but Luis is going to be doing a bunch of commentating with Randy on it's called Standard Super League, right?
It is called the Standard Super League. And, I'm really excited for it. Okay.
Yeah. So that'll be really cool. But anyway, and we decided to do this. So the way it works is there's a spreadsheet that you do the picks on. That way, we can all sort of pick at our own leisure and then eventually we'll have our decks and then we're going to play it out on Magic Online. We're actually going to be streaming it. The date is currently up in the air a little bit. It's either going to be the 15th or the 22nd, but I'll let people know. And also I wrote a couple of blog posts about it on the LR blog on lrcast.com. /blog. You can find the post there. And I ended up with the first pick, Luis. Pack one, pick one of all of Modern. I want to know what you would do.
Yeah, so I actually do, my jokes aside about it ruining Twitter for me, which it did, by the way. I really do like rotisserie. I actually participated in a vintage rotisserie draft a couple years ago, which is kind of like a modern rotisserie draft, but strictly better. And so we did the full vintage rotisserie draft and then got the cards out in real life and played them out. So I am a fan. So what would I first pick in modern? You know, I'm leaning towards just taking Batterskull. I think that's what I settled on. Though I could definitely see taking Kiki Jiki. I do not like taking Path to Exile or Lightning Bolt, even though those are both valid picks, because I think those effects are a lot more replaceable.
You would take Batterskull?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, sweet. That's what I took.
I actually did not know what you took. I did not follow the draft. So
is that right? Oh, wow.
Yeah. No, I'm not joking. The only thing
I didn't know if you were trolling me. I was just like waiting for the hammer to fall.
No. The only thing I know about your draft is that Rashad's drafting some kind of mill deck.
Yes.
And that it's constantly other people's turn to pick.
You'll note you can scour my Twitter. I have not put a single "it's your pick" up at all. I'm very, but I'm really touchy about my Twitter. Like I really try hard not to spam people on it for any, whenever I see people doing things that should be either text messages or IMs, I'm always just like tisk, like why are you subjecting us to that? But
I know Kai's tweeted about it a few times about like how tilted he is about it. And then every day he messaged me like complaining about it. It was great.
That's great. So this is what happened for me. So I got first pick and I had it narrowed down to 3 cards. Batterskull was my first. Second was Lightning Bolt. Third was Snapcaster Mage. The thing about Rotisserie Draft is that since the other players get to watch the draft ahead of you, you can kind of carve out some space for yourself. If you pick a couple of blue cards in a row, and you're kind of saying, look, I'm the blue drafter here. And if you want blue cards, you're going to be splitting them with me. And that's a big tax to pay. And people will generally try to kind of file off into their own colors. And so, you do have an opportunity as the first pick in the draft to sort of stake your claim on a deck or a color and say, this is me, which is tempting to do. The problem that I saw with it is that being the first pick, so I go pack one, pick one, and then it goes Chris Pakula, Randy Buehler, Adam Prozac, Aaron Forsythe, Rashad Miller, Sam Black, Brian David Marshall, and then BDM gets another pick, and then it goes Sam, Rashad, Aaron, Adam, Randy, Chris, and then me. So I'm sitting here and watching people take 2 picks. Everybody else has 2 picks before I have 2. And they kind of hold something over me. It's we talk about in poker, it's called having position on the player. You get to go after them and you get to see what they do first. And that's very powerful. And right. I was pretty nervous about being out of position basically to the whole entire table, that even if I take Snapcaster, that at least one other player is just like, whatever, and takes Vendilion Click or something or Mana Leak or whatever. And I'm just like, well, do I really want to fight? Where am I going with this? And then with the Lightning Bolt, which I thought was a flexible option, I had a big realization, Luis, before the draft, and it really sort of pushed me in the direction that I ended up going, which is that even though it's called a modern rotisserie draft, this is not modern, period. This is just like anything that I thought about modern should go out the door.
No, that's just the structure of determining which cards are legal.
Exactly.
Basically, all it does is cut off a lot of the broken cards.
Exactly. And but while still being a very large card pool. And the thing is, when you hear modern rotisserie, you think, oh, well, I'll take the Splinter Twin deck. Well, I just skeletoned out a Splinter Twin deck, like what it would realistically look like real quick, right? So you get the Twin, you get the Kiki Jiki, you get the Pestermite, and you get the Exarch. And then your options start to get quite thin quite quickly. And you end up with somewhere around 6 combo pieces if you're stretching it a little bit. And the decks, by the way, are 40 card decks. And if you look at the modern Splinter Twin lists, they have like 12 in a 60 card list. So you're like significantly down on combo pieces and you have to start stretching pretty hard to make that work. And I'm like, well, that's not worth it. So then I'm like, well, what's another good deck in modern? I'm like, well, Infect is pretty good and it's one that I could take cards for and kind of plant the flag. So I sketched that deck out too. And yeah, the first few Infect creatures are great. the ones that the Infect decks run 4 of each, the Ink Moth, the Glistener Elf, and the Blighted Agent. Yeah. And then but then it's funny because when you start looking at what it looks like in 40 cards, it dips really hard. And all of a sudden you're playing these like 4 mana 2/2 Infect creatures that are colorless. And, the Gravedigger, remember Corpse Cur or whatever, like all of a sudden you're playing these cards that just don't compete realistically mana-wise with the stuff that you're going to be up against. And even if there are a lot of giant growth effects in Modern, they also dip off pretty quickly as far as like, how powerful they are. So I'm like, all right, let's just forget that this is Cube. That's what I decided. I thought this is a Modern Cube. And when I draft it, I'm going to draft it accordingly. So what I ended up deciding on was Batterskull. I said, look, what's the best colorless thing that I can get? And I thought of Wormcoil Engine and Batterskull, and then, I thought of some swords or whatever, but ultimately these are the 2 that I decided. And I like Batterskull better. It comes down sooner, and it's excellent in most matchups. And definitely in any cube style matchup, I think it should be excellent. It's good against aggro, and it's good against control. So I took Batterskull. And then off to the races, everybody went. Chris Pakula took Noble Hierarch. Randy took Lightning Bolt. Adam Prozac took Path to Exile. Forsyth took Snapcaster Mage. Rashad
this one I heard about.
Deep end. He took Glimpse the Unthinkable for first pick.
Unthinkable is correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said to him too. He did correctly tweet though. After he picked it, flag planted. I'm like, well, you definitely are going to be that person. And Glimpse, for those of you that have never seen it, it's blue-black for a sorcery. Target player mills the top 10 cards of his or her library. So it's just like, all right. So you're going for something way off the reservation here. Sam Black took Wormcoil Engine, and BDM had the wheel and took Splinter Twin and Kiki Jiggy. So that kind of set the stage for what the draft was going to be. By the time it got back to me, everybody had stayed in their respective colors. Like the white, like Adam took Path and then followed up with Restoration Angel. Randy took Lightning Bolt and then took Goblin Guide, for example. So everybody kind of stayed in their little colors, and nobody had taken a black card yet, except for Glimpse, which doesn't count. So I'm like, okay, well, plan A worked, right? My whole plan was to take a colorless card so that I could see what was open when it came back and move in. And that's what I did. I took Liliana the Veil and Thoughtseize. And I've kind of, and then I thought I was going to be the Rock. So I ended up getting like a Tarmogoyf and a Bitter Blossom and an Inquisition and cards like that. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to be this sort of green black Rock deck where I can apply pressure and keep them off balance. As it's turned out, I've had to fight a little bit here and there, and I've ended up being more of a ramp deck. So I've got most of the elves, and I'm kind of doing a ramp theme. If you guys want to see what's going on with it, you can check out the blog. There's also a link to the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet gets updated in real time, and anybody can see it. It's a live open spreadsheet that anybody can look at. So you can see where we're at the time of recording. We're about 2/3 of the way done with the draft. It'll probably take another week to get the draft finished up, or maybe not even that. And then, like I said, we'll be playing the matches out either on April 15th or on the 22nd, kind of depending on people's scheduling. But we're going to be streaming it. Like, I'm going to stream the matches too. And I have to say that it's been super fun to do the format. It's just generated so much conversation. So many people, asking me, well, why did you take this? Or, do you remember this card? There's been some really nice, like BDM had a huge heel turn where he went from being blue-red Splinter Twin, and then leaving Aaron Forsyth as the only blue-white drafter in the whole pod. And then out of nowhere, BDM goes Wrath of God Supreme Verdict and just sends Aaron Forsyth scrambling to pick up the cards he thought he was going to be able to pick up last. And that's kind of one of the cool twists that you can see is there's all these little fights going on between the players as the decks come together. Right now, Rashad is still firmly in mill, though it looks like he's dipped over to self-mill as he's taken some cards that are indicative of that. And on the, he's got the, what's it called? Laboratory Maniac thing maybe going on there. And then Sam Black is just going crazy. He's kind of drafting this, it has a lot of the shell that you see for the, what's that deck called? The Primeval Titan Bloom, the Amulet Bloom deck in Modern. Mm-hmm. but he's also just going to be ramping out and kind of cheating in huge, crazy things like Emrakul and stuff like that. So anyway, I'll let you guys check that out on your own time. Like I said, there's a couple of blog posts. I'm going to be doing another one, and you can also check out the thing. And then the other thing that I really wanted to bring this up for is just to encourage you to do it yourself. After we started this, it generated a really nice buzz. And there are now, that I know of, there's 5 going on. The LRcast subreddit has one going. Inkwell Looter and the guys in the East Bay, they have one going. There's a New York group that's doing one. Wizards R&D has one going. And they're super, super fun. Especially if you can get together and play them out on Magic Online. That way you can do them with people from wherever in the world. It doesn't even have to be, your local group. But pick a format, make it big. Modern's a good starting point, but heck, do a VRD, do a vintage rotisserie draft, do a legacy one if you want, and try it out. It's super fun. And I'm telling you, you'll never get more conversation fodder than something like this. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's led to plenty of conversations between me and Kai. So,
oh God, I feel bad now.
I would recommend it, Modern Rotisserie Draft. I think it's a lot of fun. I've only done the vintage one, but I've looked at the modern ones. I would say just if you think it might be interesting, take a look at what people are doing. Also, the metagame starts to evolve a little bit because, you guys, I think we're the first one to launch. So your first picks now have impacted what other people are doing. Like they're like, oh, that's interesting. Someone first picked Batterskull or someone took Lightning Bolt third, and people are either going to emulate that, or they're going to say, oh, no, I think that's wrong, and do their own thing. And either way, it's kind of interesting because you get more information and it changes the format. Oh,
totally. If you look at the Wizards R&D one, for example, there's 2 people drafting the deck that I'm in.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just my deck is evenly split among 2 people. And in our draft, it's just me. The green-black cards are basically all mine, and basically the black cards are mine too. So it's pretty cool. I've been able to just take green, and that doesn't happen every time. Like sometimes it just develops differently as people have different ideas. And then also you'll note that a lot of the just most rotely powerful cards go early. That makes sense. But then people have different ideas. Like for me, I thought I was going to be a disruptive green-black deck, and now I'm more of a ramp deck. And you see that happen quite a bit too, where decks look kind of a certain way at the beginning, and then they'll veer off into a direction that's similar, but significantly different, to where you thought they were. And we've definitely seen a lot of that. Super fascinating stuff though. And it's really, really fun, because there's this sort of passive interaction happening, when you start taking cards that people are fighting over and that kind of stuff.
Definitely.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about before we send this one in the books here, Luis?
Just a very quick note about Sealed.
Okay.
Because a lot of people,
we did get a few people asking about that.
Yeah, we had a few people asking, and this is based on more theory crafting than actual playing. The triple Dragons, triple Fate Reforged Sealed, which is the format now.
Is that the format, or is it 4 and 2?
It's 3 and 3. Multiple people have told me this, so I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
So one of the main things about Sealed, I think probably the biggest thing, is that there's just much, much less fixing. You're no longer opening tri-lands at all, and you're opening less 2-color lands.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is that in Khan's Fate Reforged Sealed, if you opened, anything on the list of tier 1 rares, that they're likely all going to be in your deck because the mana will just work out. Whereas now there are actually Sealed decks that are just going to have good cards in their sideboard. And I think that's a huge improvement. I think Sealed is going to be a lot more fun because now you don't have to play against your opponent's, of their 6 rares. You don't have to play against every single good rare they opened out of 6. Now, if they open 4 good rares, if they're not lucky, you still might only play against 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, it's much more in the spirit of limited.
Yeah, I believe so. The games are not going to be quite as based on rares. So I think that's the biggest thing to think about. I still don't think you should build aggro decks. I still think that trying to build a sealed deck like a draft deck is just a trap. So still build a controlling deck, still play 18 lands, still play removal spells, still try to play your good cards, but now you actually have to make decisions on mana. So that's our, brief 30-second Sealed update. As we play more and as Sealed Grand Prix start to roll around, I think we'll have more information.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And we'll probably just do a whole show on it. right? We can segue that into a more general sealed show as well. I'm excited to do that show with you. We did one with Brian, and but I love revisiting those topics. They're so important. So we'll come back to those. Before we sign off here, I want to remind you that ChannelFireball.com brings you limited resources every week, and we want to thank them for that. Make sure you check out their website for a bunch of awesome free content and all the singles and sealed product you could ever need, all in one place. ChannelFireball.com. All right, that's going to do it for this week. That was a fun one, Luis. We don't have to read a whole bunch of cards. We get to just sort of do our thing. If you want to find us on Twitter, I'm on there, Marshall_LR. Luis is LSV, just a nice little three-letter Twitter name. I'm so jealous. Although my middle name is 3 letters. So that doesn't do anything. If you guys want to send us an email, lr@lrcast.com is where you can do so. And like I said, you can check out the Patreon. You can check out the blog. All this stuff is on lrcast.com as well. You can find the Modern Rotisserie links there. And you can even just copy our spreadsheet to use for yours if you want. Just clear out the picks and put new names in, and you're good to go. And then battle with your friends. It should be really fun. Next week, Luis is going to be busy testing for the Pro Tour. The Pro Tour is coming up in just a week and a half in Brussels. I'm going to be traveling as well, though I am going to try to find somebody to record the show with on a Monday. I'm not 1,000% that that's going to work, but if it does, I will have a show up early in the week for you next week to try to get some cool guest in here, some cool topic out the door before we go to the Pro Tour. But please do join us for that as well. I'll be mentioning it on there, but we're going to be broadcasting the whole thing. I'm going to be in the booth. Luis is going to be in the top 8 winning this one, so he's not going to be able to make it into the booth, but it should be a good time. And it's also, of course, the first time that we get to see the pros get their hands on the new draft set, so you don't want to miss it. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out. We do appreciate your time every week, and we'll see you next time.
So in honor of April Fools, I want to do an April Fools based sign off. And before you worry, this isn't actually an April Fools trick, because I just cannot stand those.
You and I both, buddy.
Yeah, the way Inkwell Luder, who's a really great guy, he does a lot of magic tokens and stuff like that. The way he put it is, when everyone's trolling, nobody's trolling, and
that's a great way to sum that up. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm not going to say I don't like trolling, but
oh God, if you said that, I would just boot you immediately.
But I don't like April Fools all that much. I don't know, it doesnn't strike me as something that I think is good. In any case, my April Fools based sign off for 4-1 is actually the 4 worst pick ones I've ever done.
That you've ever done.
Yes.
This is great.
I'm only picking on myself here. It's and it's perfect because it's 4-1, and you definitely have the fools part here. So
I like this. Ooh, now I'm excited.
Yeah. So we're gonna start at Pro Tour Nagoya in 2011, and this was Scars of Mirrodin, Mirrodin Besieged New Phyrexia draft, so full block draft, and I first picked Spire Monitor over Spine Thopter. So Spire Monitor is 4 and a blue for a 3/3 flying flash.
Yeah, card was good.
Solid card.
Mm-hmm.
Spine Thopter was 2 and a blue Phyrexian mana for a 2/1 flyer.
Yeah.
So it made absolutely no sense to take this. And, we're going to see a recurring theme as we go down these picks. I took the more powerful card. But I can list you the reasons why this is wrong. First of all, I took a colored card over a colorless card. Yeah, that is not smart.
That's not smart, no.
And I took a card which, yes, it's more powerful, but I think it's just worse. Spine Thopter is just a better card than Spire Monitor.
Just straight up.
So, yeah, it was just not good card evaluation. And, as a result, I got punished. So I took the Spire Monitor over Spine Thopter. I ended up drafting a Controller's Blue deck, and I went 2-1, and I top-8 the Pro Tour. So I definitely learned my lesson. But
I knew that was coming.
It was definitely not a good pick. It was one of the worst picks I've ever made. So don't do that. Don't take a worse card over a better card. And it's funny. It's not only a worse card over a better card. It's also a card that's colored. It was a 5-drop over a 2-drop. Like, none of these things made sense.
I like that pick.
So my next pick is a little deceptive in that it's not technically my pick 1, pack 1 that was wrong, even though that one was debatable. It was more what I did afterwards.
Okay.
So this was Pro Tour Dragon's Maze. And so this is, when you start with Dragon's Maze, then you draft Gatecrash, then you draft Return to Ravnica. So first pick, I was faced with the pick of Crisis Incubation, which is 2 blue-green for a pacifism, enchanted creature can't attack or block, or use activated abilities, actually, an arrest, a full arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And you could pay that much. You could pay that casting cost worth, or you could pay 3 mana. You could pay one blue green to return Crisis Incubation to your hand and put 2++1 counters on the creature. So this is a pretty powerful card.
Yeah, it's flexible, cool.
Yeah, it was an arrest, and also later in the game you could move it to a bigger thing if you really wanted to, and you could put on your own creatures to give them ++1 counters. The card I took it over was Savage Born Hydra, which was red, green, X for an XX double strike, and if X was 5 or more, it actually doubled the number of X.
You could make a 10/10.
So
7.
This pick I think was debatable. I talked with Ben Stark about the pick later, and he said, yeah, you can go either way. Like the removal spell is a fine pick there. So that's not the problem. The problem is pick 2. I was faced with a second Crisis Incubation or an Armed Dangerous. That's the red-green split card that gave your creature ++1 in double strike or made all your opponent's creatures block it.
That card was great.
Yeah, that card is great. The problem is I took that card. So let me lay it out for you. I took a blue-green card over a red-green card, and these were the only 2 cards in the pack, essentially. And then I took a red-green card over a blue-green card.
You were ahead of your time. You were drafting Teamer.
Not only was I drafting Teamer, I literally hooked myself. I passed my opponent an awesome red-green card, then took a red-green card, passing a blue-green card. So they're heavily favored to start with a red-green card followed by a blue-green card when I'd started with a blue-green card followed by a red-green card.
Oh, this is too good.
No, it gets worse somehow. Gatecrash was pack 2. This is the pack they're going to be passing to me. Both blue-green and red-green are guilds in Gatecrash.
Yeah, I forgot about that too.
So I managed to set up the double hook and cut where my opponent's cutting me on multiple guilds, at least one. They're not necessarily going to end up in both, but I ended up deservedly 1-2ing that draft, and I actually did top 16 that Pro Tour, which is apparently I don't learn much after making these picks. But
that was number 3. We get 2 more after that. This is great.
Yeah. So it was a kind of unique situation there, but the fact that I did so many, even just the base level, taking a blue-green card, then a red-green card, passing a red-green card, or blue-green card was not good. The fact that those were the guilds in pack 2 and just is a kind of like the cherry on top of this horrendous disaster. So to go to pick 2 of my 4, we'll go back to PT Nagoya in 2011. This time I'm in the top 8. So I did not magically learn how to draft overnight. And look, people might think I'm joking when Ben makes fun of me for not drafting well, or Ephro makes fun of me for not drafting well back then. I mean, I think I'm actually pretty good now, and I think those guys would agree to some, I'm definitely much improved. Listeners, you're getting a way better co-host than you would have, 3 to 4 years ago. My limited game has improved dramatically. I'm not saying I'm perfect, because I'm definitely not making the list of, top 5 limited players, but I think I actually understand how to draft now. Back then I did not. Back then I was carried by my technical play and good deck selection and constructed. Let's just put it that way.
Now this was the top 8 though, and it was draft?
This is the last draft top 8 in history.
Oh man.
So it was, first of all, a historic occasion. Second of all, the stakes were super high because it's top 8. Every single round you win is worth many thousands of dollars in pro points. Totally. And you have the chance to become a Pro Tour champion, which is incredible. And what do? I take first pick Whispering Spectre, which is 1 black for a 1/1 flying infect. And then when it hits them, you can sack it to make them discard as many cards as they have poison counters.
Yep.
Right. A good card.
The card's good.
Yeah. You can play it in a non-infect deck because it can make them discard 2 or 3 cards. It's a good clock. Very solid card. But I took it over Blinding Soul Eater, which is 3 colorless for a 1/3 that has 1 white Phyrexian mana tap target creature. So
right, I remember that.
Once again, I took a heavily colored card over a colorless card, and I took a card that was less powerful over a card that was more powerful. It's just like the opposite on both axes. It made no sense.
But this is in the top 8 of the Pro Tour.
This is in the top 8 of the Pro Tour.
That's great.
And God, the worst part about, these 3 examples I just gave, in fact, all 4 examples, they were all draft viewered, and Ben Stark got to rake me over the coals for all of them.
I mean, I have to say that while it's a bummer that these picks weren't great for you, the amount of value that Ben Stark has gleaned from these, he's told me about 2 of these picks just completely independently.
He's told you about all of these picks.
He has, yeah.
But yes, he might not have told you about number 4. I believe that he's brought up at least 1 and 3.
Yeah, I don't actually remember number 4. That is true.
Yeah. So, yeah, Ben's got a ton of value. I actually got a ton of value because let's say I just made these mistakes and then lost and then didn't really think about it afterwards. I learned way less than when Ben is harassing me about them. And so Ben was actually doing me a huge favor. He's doing himself a favor because obviously he loves the value of, getting to make fun of me. Mm-hmm. But he's doing me a huge favor too. He's explained to me why these picks are so horrible and hopefully I'm learning something from it. I mean,
sure.
Eventually I believe I did. So I lost in the top 8 in short order and deeply regretted taking that first pick. So my worst pick of all time, though, this was at Pro Tour Philadelphia in 2011. So 2011, it's funny, not a good year for my draft picks, but it was by far the most successful year I've had at Pro Tours. I top 8 at 2 Pro Tours that year. Actually, I top 8 at 2 Pro Tours, top 16 the third, and top 25 the fourth. So that was very good while drafting horribly. So I always wonder what would happen if I had learned how to draft back then. But Pro Tour Philadelphia 2011. I'm in a draft pod actually with Conley, and we unfortunately met in this draft pod. My first pick, I took Consume Spirit. So, 1 and a black, you pay X black mana to deal X and gain X. If you're mono black, this card is very good. If you're any 2-color deck, it's not. Well, this is limited. You're going to draft a 2-color deck most of the time.
Yes. So
I took Consume Spirit. I took it over Vampire Outcasts, which is 2 black for a 2/2 lifelink with Bloodthirst 2, which means it's a 4/4 lifelink a lot of the time. Took it over Acidic Slime, which is,
auto 2 for 1.
3 green for a 2/2 Death Touch that comes into play and eats a non-creature permanent. Well, technically not Planeswalker.
Which, by the way, I just took in the Modern Rotisserie Draft just for
a fantastic card. It's just a very solid 2 for 1. And I took it over Gorehorn Minotaurs, which is 2 red for a 3/3 Bloodthirst 2.
It's like maybe the best common in the set.
So, to recap, I took the 4th best card.
Yeah, this is like not even close either.
That was the 2nd best black card.
Yeah.
Actually, it was the 3rd best black card. There was another black card in the pack that was better.
That you did.
And the black card I took needed you to be mono black to be good.
Yeah. Wow, this is definitely the number one. I've actually heard Ben tell this story not only to me, but to other people. He loves this. This is just one of the best picks ever.
It's heinously bad. And I ended up drafting like just horrific black-green deck, played Conley when we were both 0-2, and managed to like somehow win a match against Conley.
Now, not to throw Conley under the bus, but you can watch his draft viewer for this too.
Oh yeah,
there's some major issues there.
Let's just say neither of us come out of it shining. And
yes,
yeah. So if you wanted to hear about me being an April Fool, these draft picks are certainly. Oh man,
God bless you, man. This list was fantastic. I hope the listeners enjoyed this as much as I did.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's valuable lessons to be learned from all those picks. Certainly, it's also valuable to know that like. Everyone screws up. Like this is like totally. Had you not seen how I drafted that year and just seen my results, you'd have concluded that like I was making all these amazing decisions. And truth is, I mean, some part of it I was playing well, yes, but big part of it is like right place, the right time, playing the right decks, getting lucky, and drafting really poorly. I legitimately drafted poorly that year. It was not a good year for me drafting. So I think what you can learn from that is that. I guess no matter how well your results are doing, there's definitely things you can learn. Also, that almost anyone has room for improvement. So, man, yeah, I did not draft well that year, and I actually at the end of that year, I took a really long look at like why am I drafting so badly, and what can I do to get better? And I made a concerted effort to get better, and hopefully, I don't have any new additions to this list anytime soon. Though I'm not counting it out. Every now and then, there's this beast inside me that's like, you should take this card. It's like. Okay, and then I take it, and I'm like, why the hell did I just take that card?
That's what streaming's for. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed a look at a prime April Fool, and this was a fun walk down memory lane, let's just put it that way.